And we're live on YouTube. Welcome, everybody. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. In just a second, we're going to be going live with episode 580 of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. Is my team all ready to fly? John, Rob, Amy? Yep, getting good. Okay. Here we go then. Recording, guys, in 5, 4, 3.
Hey gang, this is Masad Ayub from the Pro Arms Podcast. I'm here to remind you that our podcast is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network, and I'm going to suggest you do what we do and check out the other podcasts at selfdefenseradio.net.
Treat every firearm as if it's loaded.
Never point a firearm at anything you're not willing to kill or destroy.
Keep your finger off the trigger until you are on target and ready to fire.
Always be sure of your target and what lies beyond it.
Hi, and welcome to the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society podcast. We're recording this one on Monday, March the 29th, 2021. I'm Paul Lathrop.
I'm Amy Dillon, and on tonight's show, we talk with Cheng about his recent appearance as a contestant on TBS's Go Big show.
I'm John Richardson, and we'll talk about the failure of universal background checks.
I'm Rob Morris, and in our defensive gun use segment, we have another boyfriend behaving badly. So climb aboard.
Strap in.
And hang on.
Episode 580 of the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society podcast starts right now. Hey, and welcome back. We've been on hiatus for a couple of weeks. We had the live in-person speakers event in Florida for Florida Carry, and I took a week off to get there, and the week off, the week after, the Monday after the event, we took off because I was spending 13 hours that day driving back home, and so we're here this Monday. Rob, I've seen you just about a week ago, but haven't had you on. Nobody's been on the air other than me for a couple weeks. What have you been up to, man?
Well, isn't that interesting? You and I went to the Florida Carry Region 5 camping conference event, and SAF was right. SAF was absolutely right. People like to meet and talk and go, what are you doing? What works for you? Oh, I hadn't thought of that. As they say it, this is GRPC Southeast Light. And going all virtual, thank you for televising putting out the pieces you could. And a lot of people said, oh, Rick Ector was there from Detroit. He goes, when else am I going to see and talk to and learn from my friends? And as much as I see many of you here on these Zoom calls and vMix calls, no, there's things we see and learn face to face. We inspire each other. Less inspiring, but more mundane. I was on Bill Frady's Lock and Load radio show today. In the more fun category, I helped a friend take his concealed carry class this weekend, loaded him eyes, ears, a range bag. And then today I took a friend to the range so she could get introduced to her new handgun. I really enjoyed that. Man, it felt like I did something significant. The newspapers will never agree, but it sure felt good. John, what have you been up to?
Well, while we were off, I was on an episode of The Daily Bullet with Paul. In gun-related news, I bought one of those fully semi-automatic shotguns. It was a Winchester Model 50 and 12 gauge. And I got to say, it was an impulse bid at an auction. And the only reason I bid on it is because it was made in the year I was born. I thought that was kind of cool. And, the stock's going to need a little touching up, but you don't get to this age without needing a little touch-up. Finally, I'd like to give a shout-out to my granddaughters, Olivia and Aria, who I understand are watching this live on Facebook. So I will pass it to you, Amy.
That is
Thanks,
so
John.
cool.
You know, it's funny how we sometimes buy firearms because they have a sentimental value. Like, John, you were mentioning you purchased that shotgun because it was made in the year you were born. One of my first first handgun purchases when I got out of the military was a Beretta 92 FS. And the only reason I got it was because the Beretta M9 was the duty pistol of, when I was active duty in the Marines. So it's funny how we do that. But anyway, I had a great couple weeks. I went to the Florida Carry event where I was a speaker. So I got to catch up with Paul and Rob and other friends in the 2A community. I was also a guest on Uprange podcast, and I also guest hosted the Armed Society podcast. So I've been doing a lot online in the last few weeks, and I did an event, so I'm pretty happy with that. I also did take time to relax. I had a nice kind of beach weekend getaway with some of my girlfriends this past weekend, so that was a nice, weekend away, I guess you could say. But
cool.
But otherwise, Paul, what have you and Susan been up to?
Well, we took the week prior to the Florida Carry event to just have a little bit of downtime. It was downtime for her. It was a working vacation for me. I still had to write. I still had daily bullets I had to put up. But we went down. We spent a week with Amanda Suffolcool, or part of a week with Amanda Suffolcool, at her place in eastern Florida, down by. It was just, if you were to mark off Kennedy Space Center and mark off Daytona International Speedway, her place is just about in the middle. And so we had a blast exploring eastern Florida that week. Then we went to the camping event and the speakers event. And I want to echo what Rob said, man. The networking. We've been all shut down for almost a year. And to be able to meet in person with people, to be able to just mingle and talk, and what have you been up to? And hey, how about we do this? Or maybe that would work if we did it together. That is just priceless. And I am forever thankful to Kevin Sona and the folks from Florida Carry for putting the event on and for asking me to be a part of it. So, this week, been back to work, working my tail off, and we'll be home from the home base until probably sometime in May for an event I can't disclose yet. More on that coming up. But let's see here. Upcoming training, I want to mention real quick again, we've got the Polite Society podcast, Mag 40, in Sioux Falls, June 3rd through 6th. Seats are starting to fill up for that one, so if you're interested in attending, email Susan at politicsandguns.com, and she'll get the info you need. Anybody else, Amy, Rob, John, any training you guys want to talk about? Nope, I'm hearing crickets and people. For those of you on podcast, that sound you're hearing is the rocks as they shake their head no.
Right.
So, all right.
It's beach sounds. It's soothing.
Okay. What we're going to do now, we're going to step away to break. Our guest, Chris Cheng, is patiently waiting for us to do this so he can come back and talk with us about the big show. Hang on, everybody. The Go Big Show, excuse me. Hang on, everybody. We'll be right back after we hear from Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network.
This portion of the Polite Society podcast is brought to you by the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. If you carry a defensive handgun, you need protection from the aftermath of prosecution. Even if you do everything right, you can be the victim of an overzealous prosecutor or even be falsely accused. That is where the ACLDN comes in. They provide immediate assistance when you need it most. If you find yourself under arrest, they immediately pay bail money and the retainer for your attorney. Additional funds are available for trial and civil proceedings. Beyond the money, they have far and away the best team in the industry, providing you invaluable information and training DVDs that are included with your membership and who stand ready to work with your lawyer on your defense. People like Masad Ayub, John Farnham, James Fleming, Tom Givens, Emmanuel Capelson, Dennis Tueller, and led by Network President Marty Hayes. Initial membership is only $135 for your first year, and you get 8 incredible training DVDs and other educational material when you join. If you don't have tens of thousands of dollars to defend yourself at your disposal right now, you need to be a member of the ACLDN. Go to armedcitizensnetwork.org and become a member today. And please mention that you heard about them on the Polite Society podcast.
Welcome back. This is the interview segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining us today, Chris Cheng. Chris is I knew of Chris first off as the winner of Top Shot, and he's since gone on and done a lot of other things. He's appeared at Gun Rights Policy Conference, and he's got the new show he was part of. Amy, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thanks, Paul. Well, today we welcome back Chris Cheng, who, as Paul said, has been a guest on the show before. Chris is Top Shot Season 4 winner. He's a competitive sports shooter. He's an author of the book Shoot to Win, public speaker, two-way advocate, and recently is a contestant on TBS's new Go Big show with judges Rosario Dawson, Cody Rhodes, Jennifer Nettles, and Snoop Dogg. Chris also recently spoke in front of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee to provide testimony against H.R. Bills 8 and 1446 and other gun control policies. So welcome back to the show, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to chat with y'all today and just share a little bit of what I've been up to.
It's always great to talk to you because I feel like there's always something to talk to you about. You're so busy doing things. But tell us a little bit more about this, I guess this new show you're on and what it entails and how you got involved.
So there's a new show called The Go Big Show on TBS, and this is season 1. It just wrapped up, and I was one of 36 competitors on The Go Big Show trying to win $100,000. And what it is it's America's Got Talent on steroids. And basically no singing, no dancing. It's all just very extreme acts ranging from alligator handlers to monster trucks, crushing all sorts of things, flame eaters, sword swallowers. But I was really pleasantly surprised that the show also wanted marksmen and, not just gun people, but, a lot of bows and arrows and other type of weaponry. And for me, my time on the Go Big Show, was what I really wanted to do was introduce firearms into an indoor arena space that's not custom made for shooting like an indoor shooting range. And so what was amazing about my experience is that we were firing live ammunition, Tommy guns, shotguns, all sorts of pistols with live ammunition inside of an auditorium, really like a sporting center in Macon, Georgia. And we really cracked this code to allow for the safe shooting of live firearms and ammunition in an indoor space. And I'm hoping really what that will do is hopefully we'll see more TV programming with firearms, and not just at an outdoor range or in an outdoor space, but now we have this option of shooting and safely filming indoors as well.
Did you have to work with, I did not know that. That's a completely brand new concept. Did you have to work with an indoor, range builder to build that custom stage?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a custom-built, made-to-order stage, for me, and the show spent, a good amount of money. But the good news here is that the construction was very simple, and basically we were using centerfire ammunition, which is frangibles, and through a combination of that, along with a lot of 2x4s and thick pieces of plywood, and a few other structural barriers, we were able to create a very safe environment to prevent damaging anything. And so we worked with with the centerfire folks, and we had dedicated armor for the set as well. And I'm really pleased with how it all turned out. No one got injured, no one got any sort of hurt. It was all sorts of fun. And I hope it just goes to show that the shooting sports is one of the most safest sports activities out there in our country.
Chris, a nightmare scenario for such a show is, you take people because of your background and say, here are people who are not versed in firearms, and you try and introduce them to it. That's, you and I've been RSOs, that would be intimidating. I assume they only let people who are well-trained shoot in that sort of custom environment. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I was the only person, right, shooting any sort of firearm in the competition, and so yeah, right. It's you definitely need to know how to safely handle and operate a firearm right before just going on national TV and shooting guns. But the point is this. For me, when I was on History Channel's Top Shot, I was a self-taught amateur shooter who didn't shoot very much. And it was me seeing, the 3 seasons of Top Shot before me and how there were so many responsible, operators of firearms and how much fun it is. And after I won Top Shot, I never imagined that I would be a Second Amendment advocate. That was definitely not the goal for me. It was simply to win Top Shot and have 5 minutes of fame and then just sort of go back to my day job in Silicon Valley. But when we see positive representations of an activity, and in this case, right, positive representation of gun owners and sport shooters, that simple idea can turn your casual shooter like me into a Second Amendment supporter, someone who is willing to stand up and speak out about our Second Amendment rights. And that's what we need more of in not just our country, but we know how effective and impactful the media is. And so when you see TV shows and movies with guns in them, right, who are people seeing with guns? Is it criminals, right, leading the nightly news and on your TV? Or is it hopefully people like us who are responsible advocates of firearm safety and responsibility?
I want to jump in if I could, Chris. We've got several comments coming in on social media and some great questions. DJ Plain Ice, Gerald Dees, I'm going to get to your comments in a second, but I want to get to this one first. Pete over at Gun Websites says, Chris appeared in front of the committee for U.S. Congress on these current bills. Those same representatives who heard your points will be committee members for future gun bills too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the recent U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee on what they called constitutional and common sense steps, right, to reduce gun violence. This was the very first Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on this topic. So there will be subsequent hearings, and yes, it will be the exact same senators. I believe there are 22 of them on that committee that will be hearing from additional witnesses, and right, the senators will continue hearing and debating arguments and testimony.
All right. Next question comes from DJ Plain Ice, talking about your recent television show. What were the decibel ratings shooter side? How loud was it for you, bud?
Yeah, I had never shot inside of an indoor sporting arena, so right, this is literally unprecedented as far as I'm aware of, and the challenge was I got zero practice shooting inside the arena with the literal stage. I was practicing at a ranch outside of Macon, Georgia, and so it was surprising for me to learn, all right, how loud is a .22 rifle compared to a .30 caliber round coming out of an M1 carbine. And long story short, I was playing songs with my guns. I have this it's called the musical targets, which are essentially metal plates, where when you shoot them, they emit musical tones. And I had zero practice with the M1 carbine and these musical targets. And long story short, it was way too loud. It was way too loud. You couldn't really hear what I was playing. But that's the risk, right, that I took, and I'm glad I took it, even though it didn't quite turn out the way that I wanted to. Next time, I'll just stick with the .22 or bring a suppressor, right, for a particular gun. But right, this is what risk taking is about, and I just want to encourage everybody to take risks, right? The only way that we are able to move our country and move any movement forward is if you take a risk. Sometimes simply means speaking up and speaking out. It means going on TV and doing something you've never done before. But regardless of whatever that risk is, life is short, and I just don't want to have any regrets, and I don't want to leave anything on the table when I leave this earth.
Two more questions that I think are relevant. We've got a lot of questions I'm going to get to, but two that are immediately relevant. What hearing protection was used for the cast and crew? And I'm going to put this one up there. Were you able to pass on the message of range safety, and did that make it to air?
Yeah, so for Ear Pro, literally they were running to like the local Walmart and sporting goods store. I mean, it was very straightforward, right? Just the same kind of foamies. And I think the judges had over the ear Pro, and just very simple, clear plastic safety glasses. That's what you're used to seeing at the range. And the safety aspect was huge. Clearly, right, we're doing something very unprecedented. Right, it's season 1 of the Go Big show on TBS, and if there was any kind of accident or any kind of disaster, it would have been hugely negative PR, not just for the show, but for gun owners, for myself, for the Second Amendment community. So, safety was a huge component. And yes, it did make it on air where they showed the armorer verbally preparing the judges for what was about to happen when I started shooting live ammunition in a closed and controlled indoor stadium.
Very cool. One more question here, and you've already said part of it, and I'll get to you in just a second, Rob, but I want to get Charlie's in. Charlie Chambers asked, Chris, what firearms and calibers did you use? You already said you shot the Garand. What else did you shoot?
Yeah, thanks. Hey, Charlie, good to hear from you. So here's no surprise that when you go on TV, there's just going to be so much footage that does not make it on air. So if you've seen me on the Go Big show, you saw me shooting a Volquartsen 1022 ultralight rifle, and then an M1 carbine, the paratrooper version with the collapsible stock. It was phenomenal. But what you didn't see me shooting was a full automatic Tommy gun.
Nice.
And that was incredibly special. I was also shooting a 12 gauge shotgun with bird shot. I also shot a 1911 pistol. Actually, that made it on air as well. And I had plans for some bigger things like Milcor M32A1 grenade launcher, which that didn't make it, but I had it all teed up. If I had made it farther in the competition, you might have seen that grenade launcher, which I was shocked that they said yes to the grenade launcher. And that was one of my litmus tests when, because this is a brand new show, and like I wanted to test them. Okay, how big are we actually talking about? And when I sent them a list of weapons, that I wanted to shoot, and I'm like, I want to shoot a grenade launcher, and I fully expected them to come back to me and say no, like that's the line, right? Grenade launchers, no. But they said yes. And I was like, okay, you're serious about going big, so game on.
All right, Rob, you had a question. Go ahead and go, bud.
Chris, you'd said you want to go for it. You want to be daring, and you've been that a little closer to home. I don't know if this is maybe you want to just stick with the Go Big show and talk about that. You've been going into the media and saying, my community, the Asian American community in particular, LGBT community to a lesser degree, is being assaulted in California is where I'm seeing it, although I suspect it's happening in around the U.S. And you're trying to say, hey, there are parts of this community that have embraced the right of self-defense. If you're feeling threatened, come talk to us. You're part of our community too. I don't know that that's quite what the Go Big show wanted to present, but I thought that was pretty daring when I heard you.
Yeah, so the Go Big show, it aired, way before we started seeing an increase in media reports on anti-Asian American violence and the attacks. Over the past year, there's been a 149% increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans. And this is when you look at the overall 7% drop looking at, hate crimes against, other demographics. So the fact that overall down 7%, but up 149% with Asian Americans is a huge problem. And, a part of my Senate testimony was this, is that gun control has a history of being used as a tool of discrimination. And it does have racist roots, right? If you look all the way back, starting with slavery and African Americans, but the Asian American community has not escaped that either. And most in particular, it's really about the Executive Order 9066, which interned 110,000 innocent Japanese Americans. And at the time, that argument to intern a particular people, right, of a particular, ethnicity and race was all around public safety and national security. And the connection that I made to these parts of our American history and the current gun control bills under consideration is that these type of actions by the government are designed to disarm and make invisible and keep silent certain, usually minorities and marginalized groups. But what's happening here with gun control is it's the worst kind of discrimination that cuts across race, it cuts across gender, and it's discriminating against law-abiding Americans who are doing nothing bad with our guns. And so just it's this similar argument, right, that the gun control proponents are saying this is in the interest of our national security and it's going to keep our country safer, it's going to reduce crime. But we know that's not true. That's not going to be the case. And that if we want to solve our country's gun violence problem, this isn't about tackling the gun side of the problem. It's really about the violence side, right? We all know if you just get rid of guns or if they confiscate or ban guns, it's not going to get rid of the violence or the hate. And so we really need to focus on these core causes of hate and violence in order to reduce the amount of crime and death and just sadness that's been raging our country.
I want to get a couple social media comments in here, and then we're coming up on break. But Tony over on Facebook says, "You're a lucky man to be able to fire so many weapons. Dude, go watch Top Shot, Season 4. It's streaming on, you can see it on Amazon. Holy cow, there was a whole bunch of stuff in there." Charlie Chambers says, "Luck has nothing to do with it. Grab the bull by the horns and ride." And then DJ Play Nice over on YouTube says, and this is Amy, I'm going to have you comment on this one. Miss Dillon's roundtable discussion was an awesome program, referring to the Armed Society podcast a few weeks ago. Any chance of similar programs profiling our community's diversity? Amy, I'm going to let you go on that one.
Oh yeah. Thanks for that comment. And I really Chris was a guest on that panel that we did a few weeks ago, and I thanks Paul for allowing us that platform to have those conversations, because exactly what Chris is referring to when he's talking about approaching problems and trying to find the root cause of why there might be hate towards a certain, that we're seeing towards certain marginalized groups. I think just being able to have the conversation and bring up topics and bring up these differences that the people within those groups might see, I think opens up an area of discussion to where now there is, an ability to have a roundtable discussion that's, open to, like having it on a platform, opening it up to other people that might not have known that, okay, the way I'm seeing this or the way that I approach this individual in this manner might be, taken in a different way. And I know we had some comments on that in that panel from the listeners, about their experiences, about things they've done, in which we, as the people on the panel, were saying, yeah, this comment actually is offensive because of this, and this. So I think it allows a better, shared story of people that have, for example, us as Americans, being able to bring our commonalities together, but still talk about things that, are a little bit hard to discuss.
Absolutely. What I want to do, we're coming up on break. I want to go ahead and slip off to break. When we come back, I want to talk about this. Shoot to Win is Chris's book. I want to talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to also talk about some other things with Chris. So hang on, everybody. We got one more interview segment with him. We'll get to that right after you hear from the Second Amendment Foundation.
Your Second Amendment rights are under attack like no other time in history, and the Second Amendment Foundation needs you to take action now. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have pledged to make taking away your Second Amendment rights a top priority through gun bans, gun confiscation, government regulations, and even a gun tax. They have aligned themselves with anti-gun activists like billionaire Michael Bloomberg and appoint radicals like Beto O'Rourke as the anti-gun czar. The fight begins now with your text of Protect 2A to 474747. Text Protect 2A to 474747 to pledge your support and become a Second Amendment first responder. Your right to own a gun and protect your family are on the line. Text Protect 2A to 474747 and join the fight to protect your Second Amendment rights. Text Protect 2A to 474747 to pledge your support and become a Second Amendment first responder.
All right, welcome back. This is our second interview segment with Chris Cheng of recently the Go Big Show, also of Top Shot and several other things. Chris, I want to talk to you a little bit about your book. I happen to have you send me a copy, and thank you for that. What brought about, was this part of winning Top Shot, or was this something you wanted to do this besides, was this something that came out totally separate from Top Shot that you wanted to do?
Yeah, it was a very separate thing, and growing up, I kind of always aspired to be an author, but I kind of never really knew what would I even write about. What am I knowledgeable about, and what would people want to read? And so after Top Shot, I just was approached by so many people saying, "Chris, you've got to write a book, about your Top Shot experience." And initially, that's what it was. It was almost like a memoir of my time on Top Shot. But the more I thought about it, at the time, this was 2012, 2013, back when we started to see a lot more new shooters, come into the ranks, and gun sales were also, just starting to skyrocket, just like they have been over last year and like they are now. And I said to myself, my story is of a self-taught amateur shooter who knew much about guns. I mean, I went to the range with my father, starting at the age of 6, but it was very basic, right? And my father just taught me the fundamentals of safe gun handling and marksmanship. But I thought to myself, when I trained for Top Shot, I learned so much about marksmanship, and I was thinking about what were these components of my training that helped me win. And so that's where the title of my book, Shoot to Win, comes from, is that, if I go into something, I'm there to win it, and I'm going to sacrifice my time and energy and resources, right, to make sure that I'm going to do as best as I can and to ultimately win. And so Shoot to Win is a book for the beginner shooter, for pistol, rifle, and shotgun. And it's all about the core fundamentals. It's a book for the person who either knows nothing about firearms at all and is interested in learning how, but even if you do know about guns and if you've been shooting for decades, it is about reminding us how important the core fundamentals of marksmanship are. And when I was shooting professionally for Bass Pro Shops, and when I would talk to Jerry Michalik and Taryn Butler and Keith Garcia and all these top tier phenomenal people and phenomenal shooters, whenever we have some deficiencies and we'd be missing targets and just having a really bad stage or a bad match, where do we go back to? It's always about going back to the fundamentals, right? There's usually something wrong with our fundamentals that's causing shots to be missed, and so the fundamentals of marksmanship are so important. And with over 8 million new gun owners in 2020 alone, I'm hoping that my book Shoot to Win will appeal to some part of that shooter, new gun owner demographic, and help them not just be a new gun owner, because we know that just owning a gun doesn't make you shoot well, right? If the gun sits in the safe, it's not going to do any good. So we need to do our part in helping educate, inspire, and literally provoke, right, these new gun owners to go to the range. You've got to study, you've got to practice, and ultimately also, many of us like me, we're all here to have fun shooting guns as well.
Yeah, you're not going to buy a guitar and be a guitarist in a rock band and sell millions of records right now. It takes a lot of work. Same thing with guns. You're not going to buy a gun, stick it in the drawer, and be able to use it. You've got to practice. Who else? Amy, go.
So Chris, you said something that struck a chord, and you mentioned that given the platform and being on TBS on the Go Big show, that was a lot of responsibility that you had. You were mentioning that if anything went wrong, it would just completely demolish, I guess the perception of safety within people who own guns. How did you even get involved in the show? Did they approach you, and what what made you prepare to take on that type of responsibility, or what did you do to prepare for that?
Great question. So TBS reached out to me, I think it was about April of last year, and I got an email about the show, and I get these emails every so often, and most of them are just kind of crazy ideas that are just sort of dead ends. But when I started vetting the show, and they didn't initially tell me that it was TBS, and I didn't know that Snoop Dogg or Rosario Dawson or Cody Rhodes or Jennifer Nettles or Bert Kreischer, who's the host, none of those names were floated for over a year ago. So they just told me, hey, right, this is an extreme version of America's Got Talent. They wanted some gun people, and they actually had found some of my YouTube videos with me shooting musical targets and shooting all these different fun songs, and they wanted me to come shoot some music on the show, and so that's what I ended up doing, and had a great time. And I'm really hopeful that they just got renewed for season 2, and so the Go Big show will continue to be on TBS for a second season. And I've been contacting some of my gun friends to encourage them to audition, because again, I was hoping to set that precedent that firearms in an indoor arena on TV can be done safely, and we can have fun, provide some excellent American entertainment. And I'm glad to see, we'll see if there's gun people on season 2 of the Go Big show on TBS, but that's my hope, right? I want to get at least, one gun act, maybe 2 or 3. We'll see what happens.
You're starting to get requests here. Tony Novak says, I'd like to hear the Star Spangled Banner.
There we go. Keep the requests coming in.
So Chris, with that being said, what was the feedback that you received from the network and also from the judges? What was their initial response to some of the acts that you were performing on the show with Live Fire?
Yeah, the feedback from the network and from the judges was phenomenal. And it was really interesting, for me to learn about, in particular, Jennifer Nettles, who's a very famous country music star. She grew up in the Atlanta area, so she was, I guess, unsurprisingly pro-gun, but she was very interested in my act, as was Snoop Dogg. And what I learned about Snoop is I think he says either his father or his grandfather is a U.S. vet. And so, Snoop has a very strong appreciation of firearms and for our Constitution. And he's an executive producer for the show, too. So he was I assume he was very involved in choosing someone like me and deciding to take this risk of having a sport shooter on the Go Big show. And then, the other, Rosario Dawson, she's a gun owner, right? I don't know if A lot of people know that she's the boyfriend of United States Senator, Cory Booker, who's, fairly anti-gun. So it sort of makes for, odd bedfellows, I suppose. But the Go Big Show was a really great experience for me. Hearing the judges, talk about their perspective about firearms, and quite honestly, I'm just humbled that they would have me on national TV shooting guns. And at the end of the day, I hope that I represented gun owners in a positive light, and again set that precedent for hopefully more gun acts on the Go Big Show season 2 and beyond.
I have a question, Chris. You've seen a wide display of the width of the shooting sports. There are guys who say, shooting life doesn't begin until you're out beyond 1,000 yards, and I'm just amazed at that. Other guys go, what do you mean it took you more than a few seconds to shoot a stage? Because they're doing amazing things with a handgun. I was talking to a guy with a military background, and the way you used the word amateur, I heard the word people who become obsessed for the love of an activity. We're pretty cutting edge, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the inspiring thing for me about sports shooting is anybody can get really, really good at shooting if you're willing to dedicate the time and the energy and effort. And I'm reminded of a visit to my local gun range back in Orange County, California, where I grew up. And a few years ago, I was at a ladies' night event, and I was a speaker and did some instruction there. And I came across this woman who was in her mid-80s, and she had purchased her first gun about 6 years ago. And that was pretty incredible, right, for someone who was in her early 80s at the time, right, to say, I want to buy my first firearm and go learn how to shoot. And she did it. And when I was instructing her, she was a phenomenal shot. And I just was so just thankful for that opportunity and for that moment to meet someone, like her, that had such a not just an open mind, right, about trying something new, but she got really good at shooting her pistol. And here she is, right, in her mid-80s, and she shows up every Wednesday night for ladies at her local gun club. And it's like, that's so cool, because I think one thing I did not really understand before I won Top Shot was how much the Second Amendment in the gun community is almost, it's not so much about the guns, but Paul, like you were saying at the beginning of today's episode, that it's about the people, right? It's about seeing your friends and literally seeing them in person and discussing whatever, accessory or technique or maybe project. But, I didn't realize until, about 10 years ago when I really, dove into gun culture and became I would say a recurring member, I guess, of the gun community, that, right, it is really, it's more about the people than it is about the guns. Just like we know that our Second Amendment rights really isn't about guns as much as it is about being able to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government, and also the fact that we take responsibility for our self-defense and our personal protection and safety.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Chris, I do have a question. When you were sitting before the Judiciary Committee, what was the reception of the majority of the senators to your testimony?
I think the reception was, let me caveat this by first saying, I don't think that the Second Amendment should be political, right? I don't think this should be a Republican versus Democrat thing, right? That the Second Amendment and gun ownership clearly cuts across the political spectrum. However, in the United States Senate, especially a Judiciary Committee, the reception was kind of how you would have expected it, where the Republicans, right, were very supportive of what I had to say. The Democrats were very dismissive and basically trying to hammer home their points and their anti-gun agenda.
Which is kind of sad when you think about it, that they didn't quite listen to what you said. Or they just talked over
They didn't,
your points.
Yeah, and I think for the Democrats on the panel, part of it was, I don't fit their narrative, right? I'm an Asian American who owns guns. I live in San Francisco, California, and I don't think they knew what to do with me, and so why would they want to engage me or ask me questions if it's just also going to threaten their argument, right, or put their anti-gun arguments at risk? So yeah, I mean that was my experience with the Democrats on the panel.
We unsurprisingly, we've gone a little bit long on this segment as well, so we do need to cut off and run to our news segment. But Chris, it's always fascinating to talk to you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, thanks again for having me, and hope your listeners and y'all enjoy the rest of the show.
You bet. One real quick before we go, tell people how they can find your book, and if they're interested, how they can get in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. So anybody who's interested in my book, Shoot to Win, a book for the beginner shooter for pistol, rifle, and shotgun, it's available on Amazon, on Kindle, or anywhere that books are sold. And then I'm active on social media. Handle is at Top Shot Chris, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And also my website, topshotchris.com.
All right. Thanks again, Chris. Folks, we are going to step aside to break. When we come back, do you think there's been anything that's happened in the news in the last week? We'll get to the news. Yeah, we'll get to the news right after this.
This portion of the Polite Society podcast is brought to you by The Complete Combatant. The Complete Combatant is designed for a broad base of citizens that range from students that don't own a gun on up to advanced students that train often. The Complete Combatant offers several different courses that build upon each other, from avoidance, using verbal commands, and preparing for contact, lethal versus non-lethal decisions, your 911 call, interacting with the police, to even dealing with the legal system in the aftermath. The Complete Combatant courses are a layered approach for all levels of experience that will walk you through all the many stages of decisions while developing a game plan tailored to your skills and your everyday carry. Please visit www.thecompletecombatant.com and make sure you mention this ad to receive 15% off. Again, that's www.thecompletecombatant.com and mention the ad for 15% off.
All right, welcome back. This is the news segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. As I kind of teased, there has been so much going on since the last time we put out a Polite Society podcast. I should go ahead and bring this shot up so that we can... Chris is a great guy, but he's no longer here, so you don't need to look at the frozen screen that was him. But anyway, let's see. Amy, you want to go ahead and take the first story up there?
While many of us who attended the Florida Carry event were making our way home, news came out of Boulder, Colorado, that an active shooter event was taking place. In the end, 10 people, all white, were dead, including a veteran police officer. Was the shooter a crazed white alt-right male? No, he was a 21-year-old Syrian refugee who has voted for Democrats in the past. He purchased an AR-15 pistol 6 days prior to his violent act. Many of his former classmates have reported signs of mental illness, including being delusional. This lunatic lived in Arvada, Colorado, which was at least 30 miles from the grocery store. And what is the reaction by the Democrats and the president? They did what they do best, danced in the blood of the victims, more gun control, including an assault weapons ban. The problem with all the gun grabbers, new demands for new laws. Colorado has universal background checks, a red flag law, magazine capacity restrictions, waiting periods, and Boulder had an MSR ban until a week or so ago. And this terrorist was known by the FBI. None of their new attacks on the Second Amendment would have done anything. Many have asked, where were the concealed carriers? King Soopers has no open carry signs posted. The attack started shortly before 3 o'clock p.m. 7% of Coloradans have carry permits. If there were 100 people in the store at the time of the shooting, 7 could be carrying, and since this was mid-afternoon, the number would tend to be less. A good guy with a gun may not have been in the store at all at the time. This deranged man could have carried out this attack with buying a semi-auto pistol or even a machete. In the end, evil will happen, and we can only be prepared when it happens where we were at. This came a week after a sex addict, 21-year-old, drove to 3 different Korean-owned massage parlors and killed 8 Asian Americans. The attacker in that case purchased a 9mm handgun the same day he went on this rampage. Georgia does not have a waiting period. If they did, in all odds, this tragedy would have just occurred several days later than when it did. As Oric Goldfinger told James Bond, "Mr. Bond, they have a saying in Chicago, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, and the third time it's enemy action."
Yeah.
Should we go on, Paul, or do we have any comments to that?
You know, I want to just bring up the fact that, and pound home what was in that story. Nothing that is being proposed, and I mean nothing, would have stopped either of the attacks. It might have forestalled the Georgia attack by a few days, but that's it. Anything else they're proposing it would just be a nuisance to us, if not, no, it wouldn't be a nuisance. It would be an infringement for us. It would hurt the law-abiding gun owner, but would have done nothing to stop these attacks.
Yeah, and the one thing I would like to add is, I mean, I get emails every day from Giffords and Brady campaign, and they're really pushing universal background checks. And they're trying to make it sound like if we had universal background checks, it would have stopped what happened in Atlanta and what happened in Boulder. And the reality is it would not have. Both of the shooters passed NICS checks. Colorado even had a universal background check law, so that if he had bought the gun from a private source, he still, legally at least, would have had to go through a background check. I mean, their panacea for stopping everything was already in place in Colorado and had been since 2013, and it still didn't work. So
I want to also mention that even if universal background checks, even if one of them had a record, okay, and universal background checks were the law, how many criminals do you know that are going to go commit murder are going to worry about where they steal their gun from or who they sell their, it's just, no. Yeah.
Well, Paul, let's amplify that point, although we may come back to it. President Biden said that to pass gun control now is really a matter of timing. What he means is, I need some sensationalist headlines because I don't have facts to back up my statements. And we're saying that, I was tempted to write an article. I was on vacation. Okay, I've got a weak excuse. But the argument was gun control failed again in Boulder, Colorado. Again and again. And let's list out for the average person who isn't obsessive about these things the way we and Chris Cheng are. Gosh, when we think back of the mass murders and we've studied them, this wouldn't have stopped any of them. I mean, I just went through a list with Bill Frady. John, you had a list on your blog, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I got that from actually Grassroots North Carolina. But of the mass shootings that I can think of in the U.S., going back to Virginia Tech, I can only think of one person who did not go through a NICS check, and that was the killer at Newtown at Sandy Hook School. But he had to kill his mother to get the guns, which is against the law to begin with. I mean, matricide and murder are illegal.
Well, and more to the point, unlikely to be stopped by a background check law.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like a background check, what does it actually do to make the community safer? It does nothing. So I just don't understand the logic behind pushing for background checks. A background check is not going to make everything safe.
Amy,
I understand the logic. Go ahead, Rob.
John? I was going to take logic over my cheap opinion and go with you.
Well, I was going to say the logic is, they're not obvious about it, but the logic is to make it harder to purchase a gun, and that people who are marginal, but whether they're going to buy a gun or not buy a gun, are dissuaded from doing it, eventually killing the gun culture. Dissuading people like Chris. 10, 15 years ago, he would have said, well, it's just too much of a hassle.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or the 8 million people who bought new gun owners this year.
I want to bring up a great comment from Pete over at Gun Websites. He says, in fact, this murder happened with a background check. Then we should be pressing them to justify why we need these to exist at all. Require them to defend these laws. Instead say they didn't win this time. Exactly right. Background checks are not working. So why do we have them? Why not get rid of them?
Well, okay, perfect. Let's answer that great question. Thank you. They want to fill the media with the promise that background checks would help. And then, like every other gun law that they've passed, when it doesn't, they say, well, it might have. If it saved one life and infringed on millions, they focus on the violence that criminals do. They deliberately ignore, and many media personalities have said this out loud, we refuse to report the millions of civilian defensive gun uses that occur day in and day out.
Well, I think we just need to be harder on criminals that are committing these crimes, because I mean, why is it that gets ignored? Well, if we didn't provide him a gun, you know, by means of him being able to purchase one, then he wouldn't have committed this act. Why not go after the guy that decided to commit this act in the first place? We should have harder criminal laws, in my opinion.
Amy, I want to go off on that for a little bit, and this is not a gun case, but to my personal Facebook page, I want to say it was yesterday, I ran across this news story. 2 14-year-olds at the time beat another 14-year-old to death, killed the kid. The case finally worked its way through juvenile court. The judge gave them probation because even though they killed another person, he didn't think they meant to. I'm sorry, a judge needs to rule on punishment by the offense. If you killed somebody, it's 20 years. I don't care if you're 14. I don't care if you're 114. If you kill somebody, whether you wanted to or not, it's 20 years. Better luck next time. That's not the way it goes these days.
Amy, I suspect this murderer is a celebrity murderer. His name is all over the news. We've already seen copycats, the crazy guy in Georgia. Our media chums for violence. Our media is every bit the game show that the TBS Go Big show was. It's entertainment. Sadly, when they chum for monsters, they're going to find them, and they'll create them. Can you imagine? We give a murderer $1 billion in public relations. He wants to see. He doesn't care whether he lives. He expects that his name will be covered in the media. That's his reward, even if he's not alive to see it.
Right. I absolutely agree with you, Rob. I think that the media, the way that they portray what's happening and the way they portray criminals, and kind of, in a sense, they kind of glorify what what a person did. How horrific was the crime? And it just creates a sensationalism that other copycat, criminals would say, oh, okay, what that happened, I wonder if I could do it better. And so I think that there's a real need for responsibility on the media part when it comes to, talking about the violence that's happening, not necessarily a tool that was used to commit that violence.
We've got a, Wyatt Parsons just made a comment that I want to talk about. And I'm running comments. We're getting too many comments to comment on them all. But Wyatt says, or why do we have background checks if we don't prosecute when they do stop someone from buying a firearm? Or why not prosecute when we catch someone lying on a background check form? Well, Wyatt, simply because then we'd have to arrest the president's son, Hunter Biden. And that can't happen.
We did, part of that, what was it that, John, I need your help here. I know that many NICS checks, when they fail, are because the NICS doesn't use full data. They use a name or a similar spelling. Mm-hmm. Minority groups are disproportionately denied through the NICS check. Do we see a similar failure rate in the 4473 background checks? I don't know.
Well, the thing with the 4473, and I actually have a friend of mine who has run into problems. The guy's a West Point graduate, former Army officer. What he had to do was get a special number from the NICS system so that he would not be confused with somebody with a similar name, similar,
demographics.
I mean, at least his demographics, whatever, so that he wouldn't be confused. I mean, can you imagine somebody named John Smith? Or if you were looking at minority groups, Cheng is a very common name among Asian Americans. Mohammed is a very common name with Muslim Americans. I mean, the list just goes on.
Yeah, Gutierrez in the Spanish community. Morales. Juan Morales. How many hundreds of thousands of those are there? Exactly. Folks, we are... Guess what? It's the theme for tonight. We're long. And we only got one news story in. Is before I take off and just shove us off to DGUs and the break, is there anything else in the news we really, really want to talk about? Anybody want to bring up a news topic?
Well, I just want to say that you did bring in about Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
And I'm almost amazed that who brought it to light was Politico as opposed to some conservative site.
Right.
I'm not sure why they did it, but good for them.
Eventually we'll make fun of the Ninth Circuit Court.
Yeah.
Well,
we're gonna
they can't find the right to bear and the right to keep and bear.
We're gonna be making fun of them in about, and this is my prediction. I've got my crystal ball right over there. You can't see it, but it told me earlier that the Supreme Court is going to take up a Second Amendment case here in about 2 weeks that involves the right to carry, and it's going to be a Ninth Circuit case, and it's just about 2 weeks we're going to get the announcement they're going to take it, and we'll make fun of them then. And now it means... From your lips to God's ears. If they take it, keep in mind, and I believe they will, keep in mind, it takes a long time after they take it to decide on it. So don't expect in 2 weeks we have a Dick Carey decision. But I do believe within the next year we will. All right, let's go ahead and a lot of comments yet on the 4473s, but we're gonna go ahead and let that set aside. We're gonna step to break. When we come back, we've got our defensive gun use segment. Please keep the comments coming in when we get to the DGU segment. I'd love to get some of your comments on these stories. We have a blast talking about them. I hope you enjoy commenting on them. Hang on, we'll be right back right after this.
In 1928, Germany required its citizens to register their firearms, making possible Hitler's 1938 Nazi Weapons Act, disarming all Jews. Now ask yourself, what is the real consequence of registration? All in favor of gun control, raise your right hand. Brought to you by Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, America's aggressive civil rights organization. jpfo.org.
All right. Welcome back to the defensive gun use segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. These discussions are not legal advice. Some of us are trainers, but this is not formal training, and you need formal training. The defensive gun use segment is intended as information, not as training. As always, the opinions of the hosts are only their own opinions and not those of any sponsors or other affiliations. Looks like, John, you got the Cleveland, Ohio story. Why don't you go ahead and take off with that, man?
Yeah, coming from Cleveland. Why don't ex-boyfriends just take the hint and let it go? In February, a judge issued a temporary protection order barring a 28-year-old man from going near his 25-year-old ex-girlfriend after she accused him of attacking her. The pair had been in a relationship for about 2 years. He had punched her several times in the body, knocked her to the ground, and stomped on her head several times. The attack rendered her, unsurprisingly, unconscious. When she awoke, she jumped out a second-story window and ran to a neighbor for help. She had told the officers in a hospital interview that he had gotten more abusive during the last year and had threatened to kill her. He had choked her several times. She feared that he was capable of killing her, and he had access to weapons. Prosecutors filed charges 2 days later, and a warrant was issued for his arrest, but he had not been arrested. On St. Patrick's Day, he showed up at a party looking for her. At about 7 a.m. Thursday morning, the party was still going strong at a house when the ex-boyfriend showed up. He was looking for her and got into an argument with another man that had evolved into a fight outside the home. The man went back inside the house and locked the door. The ex-boyfriend attempted to kick in the door several times. An 18-year-old man who was not involved in the fight outside fired a single shot through the door. The bullet struck the ex-boyfriend in the back. The shot was fatal. Officers responding to the scene found a large pool of blood on the porch and a broken window. An ambulance took the man to the hospital, where he died. The 18-year-old gave an interview to homicide detectives with his attorney and turned over his gun. He has not been arrested, and detectives are investigating the case as a potentially justified under Ohio's Castle Doctrine.
I want to jump in on this one. All's well that ends well. Okay? Two things with this one. I'm going to beg and plead with you, please never shoot through a closed door. With the possible exception of a glass closed door or through the glass window portion of an entry door where you can see what's on the other side. Please don't ever shoot through a closed door that you cannot see through, because you cannot see what you're going to hit on the other side. Secondly, once again, shot in the back. Apparently, one shot didn't hit, either hit the guy peripherally or missed him, and the guy's like, "Oh, it's time for me to run away," and this next shot took him out. That's neither here nor there. My main push here is, again, it turned out okay here, but please do not fire through a closed door that you cannot see through.
Paul, I've got a DGU that I'll record tomorrow. Very similar. A woman in her home has a order of domestic protection. A guy comes up with a piece of structural steel, 2-inch structural column, and starts beating her door, trying to beat his way in. Door's locked. She has a strong metal door. She retreats to the middle of her home, and fortunately the police get there and arrest this guy before she has to shoot him. Because of the protection order, he wins the go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200 award. Perhaps that could have served here as well.
I want to get to a couple of. Go ahead, Amy.
Well, I was just going to say, as I always tell, because that same scenario, Rob, that you're describing has sometimes come up with as a what if scenario in some of the classes I teach.
Of course.
And I always relate, especially for women that would ask that question. I would say, look, depending on the state that you're in and what the castle doctrine, if there is a castle doctrine law or whatever the use of force law is applicable in that state to, can you prove that you were justified in the fear of loss of life or loss of serious bodily harm? Now, if someone is coming in with a steel pipe and is violently trying to enter my home, it's reasonable to believe that that person then intends to commit violence. And me being a woman by herself, what chance do I have if that guy makes it in with the steel pipe now in his hand? And at that point, I can decide, I can shout commands through the door. I can say, go away, I'm calling the police. I have a gun, I'll use it to defend myself. And you're giving them every opportunity to change their mind about what decision they're about to make and change their course of action. But, so depending on there are some states where if he is on your threshold, on your curtilage, which is the area outside your door, right, you are justified in using deadly force to stop a deadly attack. And if a guy's on my porch outside my front door with a steel pipe, violently trying to attempt to enter my home, I believe I'm in danger, and I'll act accordingly.
All right, I want to bring up some comments here real quick. Pete over at Gun Website says, never attempt to shoot through a screen door with a 9mm. It will just bounce back at you like a trampoline. Dude, I'm really hoping you're kidding there. Really hoping you're kidding.
He is.
Yeah. But the 45 will go through. Yeah, right. Okay, I see it now. Good one. And let's see here. Tony Novak says you can't shoot anyone without checking your background in case you miss. I would just say just make darn sure of what you're going to hit before you actually pull the trigger. And Dana, who is our writer, made a comment, only one shot, Paul. So, okay. He didn't shoot and miss and then hit on the second one. Okay. So.
Yeah, this is a pretty unappealing bad guy.
Yeah.
I mean, no. On the other hand, you shoot the drunk pastor's kid. You could. Oh, come on. You could. In some jurisdictions, don't go chasing problems. Isn't that odd? As firearms instructors, let the problem come to you. All right. I guess it's good advice.
All right, let's go ahead. Who wants to take the Dora, Missouri story? All right, here.
I can read it.
Okay, Go ahead, Amy.
Bryce Bennett called Ozark County Sheriff's Office to report his neighbor was threatening him with a pistol outside his house. This was at 7:43 p.m. At 8:11 p.m., the sheriff's office was notified by Missouri State Highway Patrol that a shooting had occurred at the residence. Bennett told the sheriff that his neighbor had come on his property and fired a shot through the window of his house. Bennett fired back with a .22 caliber rifle, hitting the neighbor in the hand. The sheriff's report indicated that the house had 2 bullet holes in 2 different windows, one for the shot into the house and one from the Bennett exiting. 3 MSHP troopers and officers from OCSD responded, as well as Dora VFD. Both ambulance and air evac was called in, but the belligerent neighbor refused the helicopter ride and chose to ride on the ground. The neighbor was treated for the gunshot wound and released into police custody. Yes, Rob, the sheriff believes intoxicants were involved. He has 1 prior conviction for driving while intoxicated and failure to have 2 lighted headlights on a vehicle, both which are misdemeanor charges. Those date back to April 2012.
Thank you, Dana. Paul, you're muted.
I really was muted. What my dog was barking. Sorry.
Yeah, I heard.
I am a freedom-loving person. I am glad that the 18th Amendment was repealed. That was, by the way, the amendment that ushered in prohibition. I'm glad you can legally buy alcohol in the United States. Please be careful. Please. A good number of these DGUs that we read involve alcohol, and usually the person that has been consuming, it's not on the good end for them.
Don't pay too much attention to my background.
I had Mike Piwowarski on Mike, dude. He's got you, John. Mike has got you beat. His wall is huge with bourbon, just bourbon bottles. But let me expand on that a little bit. I'm not saying don't drink. I drink. I drank beer on the air. I've gotten drunk on the air a couple times. But you don't, just be aware of your alcohol consumption. If you know you consume alcohol badly, if you can, please limit it, because I would say at least one a week. Of the one, we have 2 to 3 DGUs a week, usually 2, and at least one of them there's alcohol or some other intoxifying substance involved.
Personal responsibility.
Paul, of aggravated assault, 75% of the assailants are intoxicated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both the situational violent person and it's criminals. A lot of times they take liquid courage and many of its forms to commit crimes.
Yeah. All right, well, we are surprisingly almost on time for the exit of this segment. So, is there anything, and I haven't even looked at social media, maybe that's why we're on time. Here we got one. Where we go? There we go. George Geller says, don't drink and shoot. And Gerald Dees on our previous story said a male may not get away with shooting through a door. So, I don't know about that one, but it's possible. I don't. Anyway, let's do this. Let's go ahead and step aside to break. We've got one final segment. Rob's been doing writing. John's been doing writing. Amy's been doing writing. And that bald-headed old retired trucker, I think, has written a few things. We'll talk about all of those, and we'll shut the show down when we come back right after this.
It all failed before. Alcohol prohibition brought us organized crime, and no less alcohol. Drug prohibition brought us murderous, no-knock, wrong-house raids.
Police! Search warrant!
No, wait! The crack house is next door!
Now gun prohibitionists want laws to lead us down that same path. Don't Americans ever learn? Just ask yourself, isn't government the only beneficiary of police-state policies? Brought to you by Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership. Information available at jpfo.org.
All right, we are back. This is the final segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. Rob, dude, it's been a couple weeks since we've done a live one of these. 3 weeks since we've done a live one of these. You have to have written something in the last 3 weeks.
Some of my friends are Democrats, and many of them, unsurprisingly, are gun owners. They call themselves pro-gun Democrats. These days, I'm trying to figure out what that means. So far, Democrat politicians are keeping their promise to disarm honest gun owners. In 2020, the Democrat Party ran on a platform of gun control. They ran on a platform of gun confiscation. It wasn't subtle. It was front and center in their campaign. I'm trying to figure out what all this means. You may vote Democrat and want to keep and bear arms, but the politicians you elected don't care what you want. In fact, politicians don't really care how you feel or what you say. They only care on how you vote. And now, this is the firearms prohibition that Democrats across the country voted for. And this is only the beginning. That's up at slowfacts.wordpress.com. The article's called Democrats Get the Gun Control They Voted For. John?
Well, I just put up a post today with links to at least 75 times when the politicians, the media, or gun control advocates had called for gun bans. And it goes back to 1993, I think. I take them at their word when they say they want to take my guns, despite their protests to the contrary. In another post, I pointed out that President Biden's call for universal background checks and another assault weapons ban in wake of the Colorado murders was like double secret probation. Colorado already had universal background checks, and that didn't stop anything. Moreover, the murderer passed a NICS check to buy his AR pistol, despite being under investigation by the FBI, go figure. And in actually late-breaking news involving the Second Amendment Foundation, the Supreme Court denied certiorari to New Jersey Attorney General Gurbir Grewal, I'm probably massacred his name, who was appealing a ruling from the Fifth Circuit saying that, yes, Texas courts did have jurisdiction over his cease and desist letter the defense distributed and the Second Amendment Foundation. So we'll be here. Hopefully they will get their injunction against him so that New Jersey cannot try to tell people in Texas, you can't have those files for 3D printing. So that and more is at onlygunsandmoney.com.
Amy, what have you been writing lately?
Well, with the 8 million plus new gun owners that we have in the country, a lot of my articles have been geared towards training and helping how to choose a defensive firearm. And you can find my articles on the Shooting Industry Magazine and thegunmag.com.
Okay. The one thing I want to highlight that I've written in the last few weeks is there's really two directions that our country is heading, and it's all based geographically. Those in the far left coast and those in the far right coast up north are pushing restrictions, whereas the center of the country and the southeast are racing towards freedom and protecting freedom. We've got states like Utah and Missouri, and Utah and Montana, and I honestly believe Iowa, possibly Missouri, possibly Louisiana, possibly Texas are going to get constitutional carry. And I wrote about the two diverging areas of the gun laws on the state level on the Gun Mag. I can't think of anything else, folks. Let me go over and check social media. Let's see here. No, I think we're all good. Yeah, and Pete over at Gun Websites. Yes, when you hear a JPFO ad on the air, that is Charles Heller that voices those ads. We are very, very proud to run them. And for those of you that are not aware, JPFO, I'm wearing one of their t-shirts right now. JPFO is a part of SAF, and we've had them on the air. We will be having them on the air again. They are a fantastic organization, and I endorse them wholeheartedly. So, let's see here. I don't see any other really pertinent comments. Anything else we want to be talking about before I go ahead and shut the show down?
Facebook listeners group?
Yeah, we got one. It's if you search Facebook for Polite Society Podcast listeners, you can see the group, and if you've got some moderators that are listeners that moderate the group. There's a lot of content that goes in there, a lot of cool stuff. I don't participate as much as I should, but I do look at their time and comment from time to time. But just search Facebook for Polite Society Podcast listeners. That does wrap up another episode of the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society Podcast. I'd like to thank Chris Cheng for joining us today. So for Amy, Dana, Gary, Tracy, John, Susan, Amanda, Robin, Charlie, and Rob,
until the next time, stay safe.
Be aware.
And we will see you down the road.
The views and opinions on the show you just heard are those of the host and the guest and are not necessarily the views of any sponsors or other affiliations. But hey, not everyone is as smart as we are.
All right, we are clear of recording. I'm going to shut the stream down in just a second, but I want to thank everybody for watching. And Pete over at Gun Websites says thank you for going live each week. Well, Pete, dude, it's fun. It really is fun. We did this long before I got the job with SAF, and we're going to continue doing it should the job with SAF ever end. God willing, please not. I really love what I do. But, yeah, it's everybody here. I don't pay these guys a penny. I buy them a beer when we get together, although I didn't get you done this. I didn't get a beer for either Amy or Rob when we were down in Florida. I mean, what the heck? I'm falling behind, but no, it's we do this because of love, and thank you all for watching and commenting. Join us tomorrow and all through the week at 5 p.m. Central Time for the Daily Bullet. Join us Wednesday night for the Armed Society at 6. The Armed Society this week is Charlie Cook, and I don't know who he's bringing along with him, but Charlie's never boring. And then join us Saturdays at noon Central Time for the Weekly Bullet. I'm going to go ahead and shut the stream down, everybody.